All right, Rob Mahoney and Chris Ryan are here. I have a bunch of things. I was on a plane for 6.5 hours yesterday just writing shit down that I didn't get to cover with my dad, big picture stuff. I also was taking JetBlue and just watching ESPN for a couple hours. So
That's
watching
healthy.
all their segments.
Just scrawling furiously on a napkin.
I was like, really? A lot of like, really, guys? Just talking out loud. And then I watched the replay of the game, which was also interesting. We need to work on our post-game celebration questions.
For like
Lisa Salters
courtside?
this year. Yeah, we peaked with Stu Scott, and now it's a lot of like, what does this mean to you, Chris Ryan? How hard was it to win
Who are
the
you
title?
voting for in November, Jason Tatum?
He must be held to account. We got to really press these guys.
But let's start. I have a bunch of questions I wrote down. We'll start here. How did the finals MVP vote become a bigger post-game story than the Celtics winning the title, going 80-21, 46-6 at home, and 16-3 at the playoffs? It's just the talk culture we have now. What do you think, Rob?
I mean, I think some of it is once you go up 3-0 in a series, that's where the attention naturally turns. It would with any team, but especially one like this where there's kind of an open question in the room as to who it should be. It's kind of a perfect storm for it, I think.
So it becomes empty the notebook immediately?
A little bit. And you can see it some with the Luka conversation in this series too, where there's just a natural pivot point in the series where we're trying to figure out how to process this stuff and what the takeaway should be. And once it's pretty clear that the Celtics are going to dominate this thing more or less, we have to go somewhere.
I do wonder, though, if it's a trickle-down effect of the fact that we're doing NBA MVP straw polls 2 weeks into the season, and who's going to win the MVP gets way more attention than team that's on a 10-game winning streak. You know what I mean? Like, it's the nationalization of the NBA, where I think that the assumption is that, like, nobody really cares about how any given team is doing, with the exception of, like, say, the Lakers.
Once they know they're going to win the title, or whatever.
But even over the course of the season, I think that we're way more interested in individual narratives than we are in like team success or performance.
Well, I think there's something like baseball is obviously very siloed in that way, where you follow one team, and you see the league through the lens and the prism of your team. The NBA is not quite like that, but even the real League Pass junkies are mostly locked in on a pretty narrow window, and they need or want that kind of like, what's my way in to understanding what this season is about? And the MVP conversation is a good way to do it.
And I'm watching Wemby to watch Wemby, not to see how the Spurs are doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm like following the team. I am following the player. But I do think that, I mean, for better or for worse, that's where we've arrived. I
get it during the season because, like you said, we go player-centric during the season because teams are too volatile, right? You could be like, oh my God, they've won 14 of 15 and then they'll lose 5 of 7.
Yeah, that happened with the Cavs.
So the player stuff, and is this person top level? I certainly do my share of it on this podcast. It was interesting, though, because I was sitting in the seats with my dad with like 4 or 5 minutes left when it was clear we were probably going to win. And it was one of the breaks, and we just kind of looked at each other and we were like, who's the finals MVP going to be? Not that we wanted to know who's going to win, but what the ramifications of the vote would be.
Right.
And we were like, oh, man. I was like, so in the seats, I was like, I hope Tatum wins because then Jaylen will get one and Tatum will get one, and then we're just done with that combo. I also thought Tatum, the way he played in Game 5, probably like slightly deserved it because he was so great.
And Brown was pretty bad in Game 4.
Brown was bad in Game 4, and then offensively was terrible in Game 5 and was good defensively. But anyway, it seemed like it was close, and I think our fear coming out of the game was like, oh man, I hope this does become a story. But then the way they handled it in the locker room was so smart. It was almost like they had talked about it beforehand. Like, no matter what happens, let's say we did this together.
Yes.
We're brothers in arms. It was the two of us. And Tatum's posting comments under Brown's Instagram MVP. Like, they just did everything perfectly. They took it off the table as a combo, which weirdly in 2024 you have to do.
You do.
Or else it becomes a combo.
And it would have if they handled it any differently. I think the one side of the celebration being so premeditated is everything you saw from Jason Tatum. Like a little rehearsed, a little like, I'm going to try to have my big moment here in front of the camera.
Kind of, and that's kind of his vibe all over.
For sure.
It's like, it's like this weird
Tatum backlash?
No, I'm just saying, like, I think
just the we did it. Like, there is a...
Are you mad because you traded out of the Tatum pick?
I'm actually, you know what? I'm trying to be fucking generous here today. I think he seems like he's like a guy who was like in a lab somewhere being like, what is the perfect reaction
Sure.
to each given moment in my basketball career?
But the flip side of that is you do get a little more care around these things. You get Jaylen Brown, even as he's accepting the award, shouting out Jason Tatum and saying that we really did this together. Like, that's, I think, a show of grace that this kind of moment demands, or else it is going to blow up.
Can you
the way you just described Tatum?
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking about this when I was flying back, because we would see this. I used to love tennis a lot more than I do now, but you would see this with different tennis champs, right? When certain people would just completely resonate, and then other people like kind of resonated, but not totally, right? You had like Martina Hingis, sure, somebody like that, or like Lendl was the worst case scenario. But then when Boris Becker won Wimbledon, when
people freaked out,
everybody was like, "Oh my God, Boris Becker!" Agassi for forever,
but Sampras not so much.
Sampras never.
Yeah,
Agassi for a while, no, and then later in his career, all of a sudden, people are like, "Agassi, I fucking love that guy," and nobody ever really totally loved Sampras. Right? It took Serena years to really win that over. And Tatum, to me, is almost like getting the tennis player treatment, where it's like, I really appreciate that he just won the French Open. He was very good, but I'm not going to be telling my grandkids about this.
Do you think that for the basketball players has something to do with the lack of time they spend in the college game? Because college was where we used to develop our relationships to these guys. And think about how much it colored like how you felt about the Fab Five guys, or Carmelo or whatever. It was like always like, oh, this guy made a crazy run. Like I was obsessed with Kemba coming into the league because of UConn. So I think that sometimes with Tatum, I know he was at Duke, and I honestly can't remember
Duke for 5 seconds,
a single second of his Duke career, or like how well or poorly he did. But he just feels like he's always been this dude on the Celtics waiting for this moment, and he has rehearsed what he was going to say after this.
I think the Celtics overall have this vibe too, and the reception has kind of been met in that way, where it's obviously impressive, a dominant run. You can't indict anything that they've done here. Like, this is a great championship. And yet some championships just respond more with people than others. And some superstars respond more than people with others. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to have everything. You have the ring and the trophy, and no one can ever take that away from you.
I thought it was pretty interesting. I wanted to ask you about this because you look at like the continuum of the, last couple of decades of the game. And, we're kind of ending the LeBron era. We're probably exiting the Curry era a little bit, the Durant era. And this championship reminded me a little bit of early 2000s San Antonio.
Like a bridge title?
Well, it's like clearly the best team.
Yes,
no doubt. Clearly the best run team. A group of fan base that obviously appreciates.
You'd have them over Detroit?
What's that?
You'd have them over Detroit as best run franchise?
Now, whether it's
a whiff higher,
that most entertaining franchise is a much different conversation. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of that era where it was like, Tim Duncan got another one. How about that? Well, time to get on to baseball. That was kind of how it was in
2007 Spurs-ish, 03 Spurs-ish.
Yeah. After the Kobe Shaq dynasty, or that run in the beginning of the decade, and then it was like Spurs, Pistons, Spurs. The Heat won one there, but like it was kind of like cool. Basketball's neat, and LeBron wasn't here yet. AI was kind of fading, and we were in this post-Jordan hangover. And even though Kobe and Shaq were incredible, like the Lakers were villains to a lot of the NBA, and they had their own problems. That's kind of where I feel like we're at now, and the Celtics are very representative of that.
I think the one issue they had, which isn't their fault, is just they didn't have like some great games during this playoff run. Probably the most entertaining games they had were the 2 Indiana road games, which were great.
But messy.
Messy, but good comebacks.
For sure.
They put some chest hair on themselves. And yet people watch them and are like, congratulations, you barely beat Andrew Nemhard.
Yeah.
who's, by the way, feeling it. So it's not like I look, when you end these playoffs, you always think,
well, there's an asterisk on that because we'll never know what would have happened if Mathurin had been playing.
It's true. Well, true. Is that a Halliburton take? But you think about like the NBA TV when they run like the greatest games, or like during the summer, it's like August. They're like, oh, we'll run the best games from the playoffs. For the Celtics, it would probably be Game 3 Dallas, which they almost blew in the second half, right? And those 2 Indiana games. And that's probably it. And I think that, like, Bellany asked me, like, did the finals just came and went? Did anyone care? And it's like, part of the reason was the series sucked. Like, the finals wasn't good. Luka didn't really play that well, even though he was terrifying the whole time. Kyrie was awful. Tatum didn't shoot well for the first 2 games at least, but it's just going to want to be one of those things that come and go. Like, what do you remember from the 03 finals? What do you remember from the 07 finals?
Right.
And what do you remember from the 15 finals?
Sure. But not only like games, even moments. I think there's not even just signature moments or shots.
You don't get LeBron blocking Iguodala. There's not like a Draymond dick punch.
Yes.
There's not
or
like
a big comeback or anything.
And that's fine. And in some ways more impressive, but maybe not more resonant, right? Like running people over in this way. And I think the Spurs comp is a good one. I hadn't really thought about the 07 Spurs in particular, but that kind of machinery of, this is just a superior team rolling over an opponent that's very good, but maybe not entirely up to this kind of competition. Makes a lot of sense. And then when you flash forward, the Spurs didn't really get that sort of resonant moment for almost another decade.
No, they had to turn into the sort of like beautiful basketball Spurs.
The 14th Spurs. Yeah, that's when they got it. Yeah, the 07 one was funny because that was the Horry year, the Horry pushing Nash in the scorers table. And they won. And I thought the Spurs were the best team that year. And even when you go back and you actually like study that series, like they were going to win that series, I think, regardless what happens. The Suns had a great chance. I still feel like the Spurs were better. But then the years pass and it becomes, they only won because the Horry thing. And then they played LeBron in the finals. So 07 LeBron. So he had nobody else on that team. And that's just kind of what happens. The more I think about it, this team reminds me of the 15 Warriors. Because like if you ask the Warriors fans,
that's a big statement.
I can't believe you'd think that, but go ahead.
No, but I just, the Warriors, I think statistically, like win-loss record, how they did in the playoffs, very similar point differential.
Sure.
Young stars that clearly had more stuff on the horizon for them. And then also like they'd never really left you that confident the entire time.
They definitely, they looked shaky against Memphis that year.
Yeah.
And even in the finals, it was like, what would have happened if?
So then what's the difference? Is it a lack of charisma on the part of the stars? Like why is the Jays not as big as Splash Brothers?
The reason I use the 15 Warriors is because there was all the statistical evidence in 15 that the Warriors were a really great team.
Yes.
Right? And nobody believed it the entire time.
People were like tying themselves in knots.
And it was like, but they shoot so many jump shots. Yeah, but Curry's too young. Yeah, but what happens when they play a big guy? Yeah, but what happens when they do LeBron? And then they won and people were like, oh yeah, they won. Oh, this is great. And that's what this feels like. But I think with that Warriors team, if you ask Warriors fans now, what's your favorite title?
It's 15. Right.
Or 22.
No, I think it's
the comeback to 22.
I think it's 22. And I think 17, when they just laid the smackdown on everybody, would probably be the second one.
I don't know. You think over 15? I think 15 is still really a beloved moment.
You think?
I think so.
Yeah, 15, I also think for
22, probably number one though, right? Because of Curry.
I think the satisfaction of that looping back around is
because
probably
that puts
heightened.
him into like a whole new stratosphere all time of being able to like come back and revive that and win it again. But that 15 team felt like, hey man, like what are you doing tonight? Curry's playing. Kind of like we have to go to a bar showing this Warriors game to see this guy play. And the Celtics lacked that player.
Well, that team that had the, oh my God, we won. If you're a Warriors fan that year, they hadn't won in a million years.
And that's what the league sea change kind of feel, where it's like, this is something different. And I know people are trying to make that argument with the Celtics too, because it's kind of like the logical extension of all the threes that people have been taking for years. But I don't know, it feels like incremental versus that felt dramatic.
Yeah, the Celtics they had the second best playoff record of anyone in the 16 win era, which just seems inconceivable.
Crazy.
The 07 Warriors were 16-1, and then the 23 Denver and 07 San Antonio were 16-4. That was another case for that San Antonio team, by the way. They did kind of demolish people. They're also one of 8 teams to have a 10-point differential in the season and in the playoffs, and that includes that game where they lost by 38. They just lost that game by 6. They would have had one of the great differentials, and yet everybody's like, I don't know. Could they win? Could they win one more? Like, it just seems like people are more confused than anything. But I think that speaks to more what a weird season it was and how many guys got hurt.
Yeah, and a strange postseason.
And what you said about like this shift of eras that I don't feel like is done yet.
Well, think about how ahead of our skis we got probably with Ant, with a bunch of guys that we were like, here we go. it's Shea's time, and it's like, shot lost in the second round. It's like it's Ant's time. It seems like you kind of ran out of gas against
But
Luka.
Ant rope-a-doped us though. I don't apologize for any. Ant
I don't apologize for anything.
Ant for 9 games looked like he had become Michael Jordan,
and it was the most fun I had in the postseason.
And then all of a sudden it was
Ant.
over.
Yeah, but we kind of lost out on a couple of the. I think we all wanted to see Denver-Boston play against each other. I don't know if the result would have been different or at least more competitive. And I honestly think this thing, and we could talk about Luka if you want, but like this finals kind of deflated the night Luka fouled out.
Well, here's who I blame. Number one, just Giannis, not his fault, but getting hurt.
Yes.
Like that Giannis Dame Bucks versus
Celtics.
Celtics.
If you blame Embiid next, I'm gonna get mad.
I don't blame Embiid.
Okay.
Jimmy Butler for faking his knee injury because he didn't want to play the Celtics.
Wow.
What's my camera? Jimmy, we know you faked the injury. No, I'm kidding. No, just
has he had surgery on that? What happened?
No, I think he did.
Did he?
But just not actually beating Jimmy Butler. And then it was just like this carcass of a Heat team that just started shooting threes. And once that ran out, it was over.
It wasn't satisfying to beat Caleb Martin?
I loved it. I loved it. I think it was actually important for Missoula to just like beat Eric Spoelstra in a series. Like you need the confidence from it. But those two things. And then Denver not showing up. I do think, Luka was awesome.
Yeah.
But I do think Denver is a different animal because that team beat the Celtics twice in the regular season.
True.
And they were the defending champs. And I just feel like it would have had a different weight. Granted, we were going into the series with people asking if Dallas had the 2 best players in the series, which was, and by the way, all the Celtic fans kept the receipts.
Did you?
One of the worst takes of all time. Kyrie was good for 4 months. Now he's better than Jaylen Brown. Like that was insane.
Those guys looked incredible for a while. I understand what you're saying.
Come on. That was insane. He was incredible. He had 16 points a game in the OKC series.
We have to build these things up in our heads to be like, here's the argument for watching basketball. Like, is it this or that? I was like, Dallas should just be happy to be there. I hope they lose 4-0. It's not going to be a very fun conversation to have.
No, but it probably should have been more of a Dallas has the best player in the series and not the 2 best players in the series.
And then Kyrie is the 4th best player in the series would have been the correct take, really, if you watch basketball for the last 8 years.
Or are they saying they have the best backcourt in the series?
Of all time.
I'm telling you,
that
you
was
can find the takes.
Okay.
Does Dallas have the 2 best players in the series? And I think there were people that were like, they do. But it was more... And I was doing this before the playoffs, and before the finals. Do people understand how good Brown and Tatum are? Because I honestly feel like people just weren't watching.
I think there's some of that.
Especially Brown, which I thought was great. Anyway, the Jaylen versus Jason thing, one last thing. I was just imagining over the years if we had this for Elgin Baylor and Jerry West. Like we had the talk culture we have now in 1964 and be like, whose team is this? Is this Jerry or Elgin?
Is it John Paxson's time now?
Callens and Havlicek would have been a good one. Moses and Doc in 83.
Sure.
Moses showed up, but is this still Doc's team? That's coming up.
But
next.
I would the challenge is to be like, George Lynch, could Iverson do it without him?
Oh, that's true. What would we have done in 01? Is this Mutombo's team? That's next. Magic and Kareem, I think, would have been the best one, though. Because there was always that car keys thing with them. And Kareem was clearly the best guy in 80, even though Magic had the great Game 6. 82 was still Kareem's team. But then mid-80s, it started to flip.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people would have just dined on that every day.
Well, I think that's also part of what's confusing about the Jays conversation is these guys are just so, it's basically even. And you're like, well, Tatum seems to have been anointed as this alpha and the lead guy, but he obviously can't do it without Brown. But that being said, I don't know if Brown could do it without Tatum.
No.
I can't believe I'm talking about this.
No. CR brought up Brown. We just did that Ringer 100, which I think all 3 of us voted.
Yes.
I think the biggest surprise of the season, and my dad and I talked about this a little, so I'm repeating it, but just that Jaylen became, for me, unquestionably a top 15 guy.
Which is a huge development for him.
And I think I would not have guessed that.
Yeah.
I thought there was a ceiling for where it could go with him. And that offensively, he was just not consistent enough. I thought he was a good defender, but not an elite defender, which I think he became an elite defender this season, not just in the playoffs. And some of the stats, from December through March, which is a 4-month sample size, he was 24-6 every night, 52%, 37% from three. And they, a lot of the times, wasn't playing in fourth quarters, like, because they were blowing a lot of these teams out. In the playoffs, he was also 24-6, 52%, 5.5 free throws a game, which was another thing that was super frustrated with him, where it was like just shooting jumpers, not going to the basket. Brian Baird had a couple good things. He said, from December to the end of the season, Chris is going to kill himself. From December to the end of the season, top 20 in points in the paint.
Yeah.
In the playoffs, 12.9 points a game in the paint, which is 8th. So he actually changed how he played, and I thought he was way stronger.
Yeah.
Really the last 2 years, but especially this year. And you could just see on the bench, like, he was jacked. And I think him and Tatum, I think, will get stronger next year. But that was the biggest thing that changed to me, is that he just physically became more imposing. So that's what I saw as a Boston fan. You guys don't care about Boston. What'd you say?
Let me ask you, the thing I remember in my 10 times a year watching Jaylen or whatever in years past is, like, every once in a while, it just seems like he's just, like, dribbling off his foot, throwing it to nobody. Like, the kind of, there also seems to have been
sloppy.
a focus. And I think probably the focus was like, this is it. Like, you guys have been together for X number of years. This is your chance to actually do it. Every turn, it was like, there goes Giannis, there goes Joel. Like, now, no Brunson. Like, the road is cleared for you guys. And it just seemed like that really focused them. And maybe it's just maturity. But what did he get rid of, I guess, that is the thing that, because, like, I watched him and I was like, yeah, he's cool and good, but, like, he fucks up a lot. Like, he makes these mistakes.
I think a lot of it is very gradual skill refinement. Like, Jaylen Brown's a great player development success story in a way that isn't super sexy, because he didn't add one definitive thing to his game. Right. He's got better at a lot of it, better at sensing the moment. And the reason he and Tatum work together, and what makes them so hard to talk about, is that Tatum is the best player mostly because he's slightly more versatile than Jaylen Brown is. But he's not, like, altogether more reliable or more explosive. Like, they both have that in them. And I think what Jaylen kind of figured out this season is more, when is that spot for you? When is the moment where it's your time to press, and not, I'm going to take this offense by the reins and force it upon the moment. I thought he was better just kind of feeling that stuff out, to be honest.
Yeah, and less turnovers, less sloppy, better defensively, just more impactful, creating some, maybe one more turnover into a fast break play a game. They figured out something, the 5-out thing, and getting Porzingis and getting rid of Rob Williams and getting rid of Marcus Smart, which a lot of people talked about this week. And just having more space, I think, really helped those guys. And you can see it in Dallas in game 2 and game 5, where they're just like, clear out. These guys are going one-on-one. They feel like they can get to the rim and they can kick out or they can stop. And whatever balance they had, it was never 100% there until this year. That's what I saw.
Well, the spacing, in terms of, you brought up Jaylen Brown getting points in the paint, like, him unlocking as a cutter comes from that spacing too. The more room you have, then all of a sudden, there's so much easy offense for these guys to scoop up.
Well, you think, like, how many forwards, how many wings can do this? Like, even in my top 15, do you consider Giannis a forward or a big man?
I consider him more of a big.
That's how I do too. So if we say Giannis is a big, and we say Luka is a guard, that means Tatum's the best forward in the league, just by the whatever you consider that position.
Luka is a guard now.
I'm saying if we're going to say wing or guard.
I think he's a guard, but I feel like you've been beating this drum where he's not really a guard.
He's a wing. I don't know. Is he a wing or a guard?
Isn't he? I mean, like, he brings the ball up and initiates the offense.
He's 260 pounds. Like, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what he is. All right.
Regardless, he's not doing defensively what these guys are.
Let's say wing creator with size. We'll put Luka first, Tatum second. Ants, I think, a guard.
Yeah.
Right? So now it's KD or Jaylen for like the third best forward in the league spot.
So is Kawhi's injury record just kind of takes him?
And if you go down, like, I'm looking at my top 100, after Jaylen, you're looking at Paolo, you're looking at LeBron, Kawhi, Zion, Butler, Jalen Williams on OKC, Paul George, Lauri Markkanen. Jalen's, I think, a better bet than all those guys at the forward position. If you're looking for a two-way guy and you want to win basketball games and have somebody who's durable and play the durability thing, which I always talk about, like, that matters too with these guys.
Yes.
They don't get hurt.
That was one thing that it didn't even occur to me until I think Derek White chipped his tooth. Where I was like, aside from KP, it just feels like these guys always get up.
Yeah.
You know, like it is really annoying.
You're right.
as a fan of a team with
it's one of the rarest skills though, right? Durability is now like one of the hardest commodities to find.
And it
sports.
may be increasingly valuable. Like if the league is going to have all this parity where you have to be healthy the time things swing your way.
Yes.
And I think what Boston's been able to do over time is give themselves as many cracks at this thing as they possibly can. And that's health. That's also just this team staying together despite all of us and everyone else trying to kind of tease them apart and pull them apart. It's really their superpower and what allows
it's
them
almost
to
like
get this far.
With the way that they got rid of Marcus Smart and Time Lord to get Drew and to get KP in. It's almost like they doubled down on Brown and Tatum. They were like, we don't need to screw with this too much. We need Drew Holiday, who's like the consummate teammate and defender.
You do the Drew trade every day of the year.
Sure. Yeah.
The Marcus trade, I think, was a lot more painful.
Yeah.
And we said this last year on the pod over and over again. That trade was more about Tatum and Brown than it was about Marcus Smart. There was a big brother thing with that dude.
Mm-hmm.
And he really felt like it was the three of them together. And they had to get rid of that. And it was a brutal trade. And I'm sure Marcus, like if you noticed, nobody heard from him the last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
We haven't heard from him yet, I don't think. Haven't heard of him on a podcast or seen him on First Take. He's stayed out of this because I think this is pretty painful.
You think he was supposed to have Julius Randle's spot on the halftime show and they just couldn't make it?
Who was the backup plan if Julius called in
work?
Said, we looking at Chet Holmgren at that point? Like,
I think we go down the agency list on that one. I'm not sure who's next in line.
I've already made my case about why I don't think Tatum is a finished product, but I wanted to ask you guys, is Tatum a finished product in your mind?
I think he's a finished product on the Celtics with this lineup. I don't really know what else he's going to add to his game. And frankly, I think if there was going to be any development, it'd be like non-basketball. It would be like, I think...
personality development?
Well, I think that there's something that happens when you win a championship that changes like the way you approach the
Maybe
media,
takes up
the
cooking,
way,
like a chef podcast.
Honestly, I'd love
chef video podcast.
Let's see it. Deuce and Jay.
Let me see the knife
kitchen.
skills.
Yeah, right.
Woodworking.
Yeah, teaching my son how to julienne like oranges.
He gets into expensive cocktails.
Yeah.
Oh, I like
how
that.
To
for
make
him.
like good Scotch drinks.
Yeah.
He'd be a good muddler. I could see it for him.
What do you think? Is he finished product?
I think more or less finished product. But I do agree that there's an ease that comes with winning sometimes that unlocks something for these guys. You hope that it doesn't decrease some of the hunger. You hope that there aren't negative trade-offs that come with winning because some guys let their guard down. But ultimately, I think he's more or less this player. I think that player is really good. I think even the Celtics themselves in some ways have been waiting for him to take some next step as a shot creator to hit that next level. That's a really hard thing to do. And if you want to run down the list of the top 100 guys who can actually create individual offense at a higher level than Jason Tatum, it's really not that long a list. He's already really, really good.
Why do you need him to have some other level?
Because I think there's one more piece to him that we haven't gotten to yet.
But do you feel unsatisfied with where he's at?
No, I think it's more a case to me of, is this it? Or is if there's one more level, then that changes the ceiling of what happens the rest of the decade with the Celtics team. Because to me, the level is, I think he can get stronger because he's stronger now, but even I think he could put on like 7-8 pounds and he's just the way he bully balled Dallas in the fourth quarter, I feel like is part of the future with him. But figuring out 8 to 13 feet and being able to use his strength and speed to get by somebody, but then just take easier shots versus constantly just barreling into people because you're going to get eventually hurt.
I mean, very few people watch as much Celtics as you. How much of it is the system that they play versus like what his limitations are?
No, it's the Hanlonitis, which which Russillo and I have talked about forever.
Yeah.
It's threes or get to the rim. And there's that one, like, I mean, the best at it is Shea right now, right? And Luka too.
Mm-hmm.
But these guys that, I got a half step on this. Now this is a 10-footer. I'm taking it. And Jaylen's good at it too. And Tatum's just not good at it yet. I think he'd be a better 3-point shooter too. He's not good enough yet as a 3-point shooter.
Well, a lot of
40% 3-point
he
shooter.
should.
Yeah.
He takes really tough ones.
He takes really bad 3-point shots. And he's got there's an efficiency standpoint. I remember, LeBron's the best case scenario in this, but LeBron, after he won the first title, that next year, he was so awesome coming out of the gate.
Yes.
It just felt like he had unlocked something mentally. And remember, he shot 60% for like 3 months. We were like, oh my God, he went up a level. And then he kept adding stuff year after year. By 2015, he had a post-up game. By 2018, he could just single-handedly overpower whatever lineup somebody had.
Yeah.
And that's why I just think it's too early for Tatum. I think there's I really do. I think there's another level for him.
He just doesn't have the holes in his game that LeBron did, and that so many other superstars. I think again, this is what makes him so hard to talk about. He can kind of do everything. So it's not like, oh, go down to the post, because he can do that. It's not that he needs to work on his handle in the way that Jaylen did, because he could already do that. Ultimately, the way you create like offense as a team, is it coming from a superstar like Luka, or is it coming from system? And for the Celtics, it's about the system.
It is.
And that's like, that wins you championships in this context. And that's okay. And he doesn't have to be that guy. Like, he doesn't have to be any better than he is. This kind of goes back to the
Spurs thing. It's like, yeah, there's some legendary Duncan games, and you'd blink your eyes and all of a sudden he'd be at like 24 and 12 in the third quarter. But you don't leave those games being like, Tim Duncan fucking killed everybody out there. And when
I left it that way. I love Tim Duncan.
Yeah, I love Tim Duncan too.
One of the 10 best players of all time. And I agree with you that I didn't necessarily have that reaction to a lot of his games.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, as a viewer, I wasn't like pouring through the analytics. It was just like, oh man, how did fuck did Duncan wind up with like 22 and 12 already? Like, and then I feel that way about Tatum, kind of, where it's just like, oh, this guy's got, I thought he was having an off night, but he's got 24, you know, like it just kind of emerges out of the style of basketball that they play.
I did feel like the Celtics, I hate when things go well and then people start talking about what the mindset was.
Mm-hmm.
And they definitely spilled the beans on some of the stuff. Like, they want everybody to shoot and be able to switch on D is the platonic ideal of the Celtics team. And they basically, after they won the title, they're like, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do this. And I just feel like teams are going to copy that now.
Like, how do you copy it?
I mean,
go find Jaylen Brown.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to copy.
More and more shooters that come into the league every year. Like, if I'm looking at like the Spurs, right? What's the platonic ideal of a Spurs team? And they like somebody like Reed Shepherd, right?
Sure.
Who they have a chance to take at 4, who's an incredible shooter, but he's 6'1.5". Is that somebody that can switch on D? Is that somebody in the last 2 rounds of the playoffs? Would teams just hunt him, or could he stand up for himself a little bit? Those are conversations you have to have now if you're the Spurs. Do you just want switchable athletes who can shoot, or are you trying to build like an old school basketball team? I don't know. And maybe the answer is, well, if you have Tatum and Brown, this is how you should
I just feel
play.
like we're 6 weeks removed from being like, it's all about size, it's height. It's like, you have to somebody who's going to take Jokic. You have to have somebody who's going to take Giannis. Like, that is going to be the question mark that follows this team around a little bit, because they wound up playing a Dallas team that, even though they had like the vertical threats with Gafford and Lively, it's not Jokic. It wasn't, like a Giannis. I feel like they didn't have to. There was not a clash of styles in this series.
If you want a reason why the Celtics won this series, it's that they were overwhelmingly more talented than the Mavericks. If you want the secondary reason, it's that Jason Tatum can guard players like Daniel Gafford and guard players like Derek Lively for the most part and get away with it. And so, like, if you have that guy, everything unlocks for you. If you have a small forward or power forward who's not as good at that stuff as Jason Tatum is, not as good a rebounder as Jason Tatum is, I think you lose a lot of those battles all of a sudden.
The crazy thing is, I was actually thinking about this when he made his pretty valiant return to the floors. I was like, if Porzingis had been healthy this entire series, like, this might have been like an all-time like wipeout. Like, if the
Celtics had played the whole playoffs, I mean, Porzingis had played the whole playoffs, I'd probably 2 of those games flip. Would be my guess.
Could be.
Because it was just, he would just have moments where he was the best guy on the floor for like 4 minutes.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, even
can't replace
early
that.
on in Game 5, like, there were times where like you would just see Luka or Kyrie get daylight, and then they would see Porzingis, and they would literally hit the brakes and turn around and look for somebody else to pass to.
Unbelievable job by him to play. I mean, he basically admitted after he really could have gotten hurt. And I think they were really scared to put him out there. But once Dallas did what they did in Game 4,
I mean, that actually was like one of the more like old school pure sports. Like, this guy really wants to play in the finals one more time. Like, because you have to imagine like the worst case scenario for that would have been pretty bad.
What a personality rehab by him.
I know.
This was, if you asked somebody even a year ago, what are your thoughts on Kristaps Porzingis? You'd have been like, loser. Good stats, bad team guy. Like, that would have been, can't stay on the court.
Be a Hornet or be a Wizard for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it was hilarious when he got traded to the Wizards.